Hello and welcome to ETF Interviews. I'm Jamie Gordon, editor at ETF Stream, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Henrik Christensen, the Qualcomm Chancellor's Chair of Robotics and Professor of Computer Science at the University of San Diego, among many other accolades, startup founder, investment advisor, and many other things. Henrik, I probably missed a few there.
Don't worry, and thank you for having me.
And tell us, so you're based over in the US, coming over to Europe at the moment, bunch of conferences with asset managers, investors, healthcare professionals. But last week you were working with NATO. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing there over in mainland Europe?
So I was in Switzerland for something called the European Land Robot Trials, where we have a set of scenarios set up by the military for what is realistic in terms of convoying, rescuing people from a battlefield, logistics, demining, removing remains of war, sort of unexploded ammunition and things like that. So set up by the military, and then we send in robotics technology with humans to figure out what can we do today. And then also figure out where are the limitations. If GPS is jammed, if we jam the communication, if there are obstacles in the way, how well do these robot systems do? So when we deploy them in, let's say, Ukraine or in the Middle East, we know where would they be successful and where would they fail.
Of course, I'm speaking to you now at the time where we're talking about this massive expansion of drone technology investments.
Yep.
What are you seeing on that front? And what, obviously, based on the trial that you were sort of part of last week, where you were judging, what are you seeing in terms of the key developments in that space at the moment?
I think we're seeing both low-cost drones, so low-cost drones, and both in terms of a cost metric, but also in terms of many of these drones only have to do one mission. They only have to go once. And for that reason, we can sort of optimize it for this. We can optimize it for new manufacturing methods like 3D printing and a number of these things. And then being sort of robustified so that they can operate in an environment where GPS might be denied. They might only have partial communication. We're seeing new technologies like Starlink enabling us to rethink how we have communication technologies. So it's very much getting optimized for the current landscape and how can we get them as quickly as possible and as many as possible.
Broadening out from the drone story, what we've been observing over the last few years, both from the technology side, but for ETF Stream's sake, the investment side as well, is this, this turning point moment, what people might say the ChatGPT moment in the last few years in artificial intelligence, but also robotics technology and the convergence of the two. Obviously, a lot of that at the moment is focused on things such as large language models, increasingly things like humanoid robots. Is there something in this story you think is being underappreciated at this sort of what is really a turning point moment for the amount of investment that's being focused into these channels?
I'll give you two different answers to it. So it's more, in some sense, I think we're seeing a convergence moment where materials technology, computing, and AI is getting to a joint maturity level that will enable a number of new businesses that we've never seen before. So for a long time, we've said robotics is sort of 5 years away from doing it. It's here now. And it's really, we're getting low cost enough compute. We're getting new materials, soft materials that we can 3D print. So as an example, one of my colleagues has a robot that you literally have designed, you 3D print it, and when you take it out of the 3D printer, it walks. No assembly required, nothing else. You can just, and that would allow me to more or less take this CAD model, send it anywhere in the world, they print it, and they have a product. So logistics suddenly gets out of it. And that's pretty amazing that we've gotten to this point right now. I think humanoids are overhyped. Right now, everybody is sort of like, oh, we can do everything with humanoids. And I was just 3 weeks ago at the big conference in robotics and automation in Vienna, and we saw 30 humanoid robots there dancing. And I'm sort of like, show me something useful. I don't need a robot that's doing all of these motions. I'm like, okay, show me something that makes money. And we're still short on good use cases for this. We've seen it in factories. Figure, a number of other sort of companies have shown that they can do it in factories, but not at human pace. And I'm not going to put in a robot if I'm going to have to slow down my production line for it. So I think we're we're high on this, and we also have to remember, in total, the humanoid industry today makes less than 25,000 robots a year. So we're still early days. I think it will come, but I think there we have the AI, we have sort of the humanoid. Most humanoid robots are short on hands. We're not very good at actually building hands that are good enough. It'll get there within the next couple of years, but it's going to take time. We don't have, so the fact that I can pick this up and do this sort of nicely, we don't have robots today that can really do this reliably. And that's, so the business case is an aging population. So the world is aging 8 hours a day. So if you look at the average age of the world population, it goes up by 8 hours a day, or 4 months every year. So there's a huge need for it. And the home would be a nice use case, but it will take 5+ years before we're there.
Do you think our fascination, our recent fascination or increasing fascination with the idea of a humanoid robot comes from a bit of an anthropomorphic obsession rather than looking at what's actually useful? Do you think that what we've already seen in terms of factory, sort of equipment, machinery, robotics, is already serving that sort of utility function, and the next step might just be applying things like AI, more sort of sophisticated brains to those existing technologies?
So I think it's culturally anchored. So if you look at the Asian, they have sort of, their philosophy is the ultimate thing you can do in life is to replicate yourself. You can do it biological means, but you could also build a humanoid. That's why we saw the early humanoids coming out of Japan, coming out of this because they wanted to be able to build, the ultimate thing is, could I as an engineer replicate myself and do this? And we've seen Ishiguro in Tokyo, he built copies of his wife and his daughter, and later on a copy of himself. And that was the ultimate thing for him, I can do this. In the Western cultures, we are more business oriented. I have a function, I need it solved, whether it's humanoid or something else, less relevant. And that's why you're seeing, like recently, multiple companies have shown that they can go into an automotive factory, they can stand by a conveyor belt, and they can do sorting. And my first question is, what do you need the legs for if you're going to stand still for 24 hours a day? So, and that's where the business people will come in and say, no, we don't need a full humanoid. We need components of the humanoid, and I'm from Denmark, so I think about it as Lego bricks. I need the Lego bricks where I can compose it for a particular application. But for the Asians, they're like, no, I need a full humanoid. So it's a cultural difference.
That's interesting. What would you say are the most promising or most important innovations we are seeing within robotics at the moment? I mean, obviously, as we mentioned, humanoids being the thing that's in focus, the thing that people are obsessing over. What are the innovations that are really going to move the needle, in your view, over the next decade or so?
So I think, as I mentioned before, hands, being able to get hands, but both the dexterity and then also the tactile sense, that we can really get sort of the feedback of, am I touching something? How am I touching it? And that will be important. Everybody right now is building 5-finger hands. And I'm like, do I need the pinky? Do I need the thumb? Why are we not having 3-finger hands rather than 5-finger hands? So I feel it's a little too anthropomorphic for what we need, but I think better hands, better sensorized is going to be a game changer for getting into the house to do a number of things, and also for logistics. We're going to see a huge sort of push in logistics. And I think right now we've seen the big companies, whether it's autonomous transportation or it's manufacturing, it's been the big companies. I think the next wave is medium-sized companies. We're going to penetrate into the medium-sized companies for logistics, for manufacturing, and that we need the flexibility, we need the ease of programming. So the new vision language action models or the Japan models will allow us to do much easier programming, so the cost of developing a new application will be very limited. Then slowly over the next 10 years, we will start penetrating the home. We will start thinking about basic functions in the home. driven very much by the aging demographics. There's going to be a huge need in China, in India, in Europe. And then I think the big driver, so I'm saying if I recently sort of wrote a roadmap about where do I think robotics is going across Asia, Europe, and the US over the next 10 years. And there I'm sort of saying if you want to do mass manufacturing and sort of scale, you should do it in Asia. In Europe, you should leverage the fact that there's very mature legal frameworks in Europe that enables us to think about ethics and regulation and all of this. So if you have a robot that needs that kind of framework, you should develop it in Europe. If you want to go venture and startup, you should do it in the US. So it's three very different, and then hopefully we can slowly remove some of the trade barriers so it'll be a global collaboration across the regions.
Turning from robotics to artificial intelligence for a moment, as someone who's been writing about this sector for decades and decades, what do you make of what's currently going on in the world in terms of the hundreds of billions of dollars of capital expenditure on sort of expanding AI compute, sort of building out all the nuts and bolts, the picks and shovels to facilitate more sophisticated, scaled large language models? You know, we're talking about companies, so-called hyperscalers, who've gone from massive cash-rich companies to issuing debt, diluting their shares in what is basically a feverish arms race. What do you make of this scenario we're watching play out at the moment?
So I think it's very exciting times. I think most of these are being oversold to a degree that is ridiculous. And at the same time, I think we will go through a revolution. So the good news is we're getting better and better models. But also I think we will get to small models rather than big models. I want to scale them down. I want them to be able to run on my wristwatch or on my cell phone. And not so much because they should run on a cell phone, but I need them in my vacuum cleaner or in the different robots in my home so they don't run in a big data center. So I think we will see an evolution where processing will get to a point where we can do things at the edge. And at the same time, we will get more compressed models. So in some sense, I think we will get to a place where the big providers, OpenAI and Claude and XAI, will have developed models, but they might not be the beneficiaries of this. It might actually be companies that come in and say, great, you developed this model for me, let me take it now and put it into business. So I'm not convinced the hyperinflation we're seeing for the really big AI companies will pay off in the long term. I just think they've made investments that are unsustainable. But the rest of us will benefit, be able to put it into all sorts of things. So I'm from San Diego, so I can see Qualcomm out of my office window. And if I look at it, they come out with their new sort of chips where I can get 8 CPUs and 6 GPUs and have more than 1 trillion operations per second in a single chip that is battery efficient. I can give it to my students and they can run it for an entire day without changing batteries. This is an example of a game changer. So whether it's NVIDIA or Qualcomm or AMD, or that will enable us an entirely new generation of products we have not imagined. But I think we're riding on the back of these large companies that are developing this technology, and we're seeing it, and the valuations compared to what they can deliver are a little bit unrealistic. But for some of it, like, I've said the same thing. If you look at it, I was walking around in the streets of London, and I'm seeing Waymo is here. Waymo has invested 20 years in autonomous driving cars. I'm not convinced they will ever be able to get the money back.
But to your point, right, you have this unique perspective of being on sort of technology, venture, academic side of this story, and also having the investment perspective here. Sure. One thing you talk about a little bit at the moment is robotics going through a bit of an iPhone moment. Yep. Spoiler alert for any who haven't seen Henrik speak before. But what's really interesting here, if you take that example, draw it out into AI, we are not denying what will happen over the next 10, 20 years. It will be transformative. Likewise with mobile phones. But we did have to go through the TMT event in the late 90s and 2000. To your point about what's going on right now, seems just... It's fantastical, is it not? So, yeah, do you see comparisons to that time when you're sort of looking at a technology curve, development curve, and sort of a misalignment with sort of this massive dump of investment that's happening in a short space of time?
So I think, yes. So I think we were so used to in robotics that we were limited by compute. So if you look at the first Roomba, the cost of compute there was $1. That was what we could afford, and we could get very little for $1 in terms of compute. Now you can put in so much more compute power. So it is the confluence of materials, compute, and AI that enables an iPhone moment where suddenly we can develop a unique infrastructure that will enable so many applications. So in manufacturing, we will go after the small and medium-sized enterprises, and they will be enabled. This will allow, we're seeing the growth now in the US because of the reshoring. I think we'll see a similar reshoring in Europe. It will come back to, and some of it has to do with that we as customers are very impatient. I order something on Amazon, and my wife is it coming now? Is it coming now? So we have this impatient of this. So manufacturing needs to be extremely close to the customers. This will be enabled by, we have the technology base for doing this. So manufacturing, logistics, and then the fact that we're getting home care services, we're getting health care. So this is going to be an interesting confluence of a new economic growth. And I think most of the investments we're seeing right now are in the pieces, not in the integration.
Yeah, the end product. And I suppose we talk about this build out in AI that's currently occurring, especially the competition in large language models. What could this mean? What will this mean in your view to robotics? When we think about something like, the invention of combustion engines, cars, of course you have to have drivers to go ahead and drive them. With robotics and automation, we already have robots that can go and do their own thing, a particular task preset. If we have a brain that's good enough to underlie robots, we talked earlier about sort of medical advances where a surgeon can control a robot from thousands of miles away. What if the surgeon's not needed and we have this brain that's good enough to run the robot by itself? What could that mean for robotics?
So we're going to see it will become a new infrastructure that sort of enables you to do functions that you've not imagined before. But I think the important part there is that the large language models and these things are allowing us, for instance, to use common sense knowledge. So it allows me to, if I get e-commerce and I get a big bag of groceries, I can give it to a robot and say, could you put it away? And it will sort of look at it, milk, refrigerator. It'll look at, curry, okay, going into the pantry. And every one of us will have different organization of the pantry depending on your cultural differences. But the AI models will be smart enough to sort of understand, it's an Indian home. Okay, this is how we organize it. This is a Scandinavian home. This is how we organize it. So all of this sort of common sense knowledge. So if I ask you and said, could I get a glass of water? It'll mean say, I have to go to the kitchen. I have to. There's a lot of this sort of reasoning that even 5 years ago would have been unthinkable. Today, we can ask very simple things, sort of the Siri moment for robots, where you can ask it to do very simple things and it will figure it out because it has a deep enough reasoning model they can use.
Going back to that example of sort of an aging population in care, we also discussed this idea that you don't want a robot to come into your home and talk to you, interact with you. Same, you might not want a care worker to come into your home and do the cleaning. You want them to interact with you. Do you think, sort of two opposite use cases there, do you think with robotics, do you think and the convergence with AI, the primary use case will be these more menial tasks taken away from humans? Or do you think actually over time you will get more and more sophisticated use cases for these technologies as they sort of converge?
So I think, so we've seen this, and I've had deep discussions with my mother about this, and she was very frustrated that social workers came to her home, cleaned the home, and left. And she's like, no, wait a minute, I want to talk to you. What I'm missing as an elderly person living alone is the human contact. She was less worried about the dust and all of this in her home. So being able to have robots come in and take away that so that the social workers could spend more time with the human contact would be a big deal. And at the same time, I think we will also get to where the robots will become, in lack of sort of the right terminology, the intelligent wheelchair that would allow her to participate in social functions so that would be a replacement. So we're going to see a way where, as a person, you can tell us how social are you, and we can sort of modify your daily life to fit how rich social interaction do you need. So I'm saying I would like to get a robot that can allow me to get out of bed, take a shower, get dressed, have a meal, and participate in social functions. There's no robot available today I'm going to shower with. I'm not just like not there, I'm like, it's going to be sparks and whatnot. So we're not there, but that's where we need to get to. We need to get to where all of those functions, in theory, could be done, but not at the loss of human contact.
When you're speaking to some of the largest investors in the world, and gather you and our fellow as part of Temasek, the Singaporean sovereign investor there, which is stewarding hundreds of billions of dollars, when they're talking to you about robotics, artificial intelligence, how are they thinking about gaining exposure to these sort of nascent growing technologies and sectors? And what's your sort of advice in terms of steering them in a direction? Is it to go more through sort of public listed companies, or is it more into private markets? And where is the money being directed? Which geographies?
So if you look at companies like Temasek, they're global. So they have investments, huge investments, more than 100 billion in Europe, more than 100 billion in the US, and the rest in Asia. And they are looking at the full spectrum from how do we have an investment vehicle that enables us to pick up early seed investments, and how do we make sure we can also invest in the large global enterprises. So they're very diversified, and not sort of, for somebody like Temasek, you can't afford to bet on one horse. You have money sort of all over the place. And they invest in early stage AI, and they invest sort of a lot into robotics. But for them, it's also, they're a small country, they have no natural resources, they're aging rapidly. How can they continue to be a valuable economic player in this? And for them, it's how do we make sure we have the elderly care we've talked about? They think deeply about how do we make sure we have the right human capital? How do we have the right education for this? And then how they have the advantage for a place like Singapore. They have a single electronic medical record. So they can actually do experiments that are nation scale, but at the same time, it's only 6 million people and it's very concentrated. So they can do experiments we couldn't do in the UK. And that enables them to do this. For them, we had a long discussion about, I think, people are worried about, am I going to lose my job to AI? Am I going to lose this? And I'm going to say the white-collar jobs are going to go before the blue-collar jobs. And at the same time, I'm sort of saying, I think you should, if you go to college, you should learn foundations, you should learn how to do problem solving, and you should learn how to acquire new knowledge. The world moves at an exponential pace. You need to spend enough time acquiring this to make sure you're constantly upskilling. So my recommendation to the people in Singapore and even to the people in the US is you should spend something like 4 hours a week doing upskilling of yourself to make sure that you stay current. If you don't, you will slowly become irrelevant.
And how do you become a good investor in these themes, technology? We were talking earlier about SoftBank and its founder, I think a very aggressive approach to capturing innovation, trying to ride the wave there. Things like selling off Boston Dynamics to buy shares in OpenAI. What does it take to be a good investor in these technologies in a time where it seems as though everyone's piling in huge amounts of money on a speculative basis for short-term exponential gain?
So I think it comes down to you have to be curious, and you have to have sort of a broad enough perspective. You can't afford to just be an expert on how do I build AI models or something like that. You have to sort of look at, so I think I start out by thinking about what are the megatrends? If I look at the world, what are the megatrends we're seeing? So we're seeing aging population, we're seeing climate, we're seeing a number of these things that are sort of coming in that are impacting how we think about the future world. And then using this to sort of say, what is this going to drive in terms of business opportunities for how do I do better healthcare? How do I do better education? How do I do more eco-friendly technologies? And then based on this, if I now look at it through the lens of robotics and AI, how can I contribute to this? So I sort of start out I have sort of a free tier model where I say, what are the megatrends? How do I make money on the megatrends? What are the gaps I can't fill today? And what is the R&D we need to be able to do this? So I have a causal chain. If I make progress on this particular technology, here is the gap it's going to fill, here's how I'm going to make money, so I can feed this back into my R&D. So there's a very clear causal chain between how do I make money and what should I do.
How aligned would you say capital markets are, and sort of where the capital is going in terms of these technologies and innovations which are actually useful for society? You mentioned obviously aging populations and a numerous sort of list of robotics applications. How aligned are the sort of where the money's going, where the demand is from investors, and the things that are actually going to move the needle and add value to society?
So I think right now people are making huge bets on AI, and more based on the sale or a vision for how everything is going to get changed. And at the same time, I'm a little bit worried about people are not thinking far enough. So if you look at Jeff Hinton, one of the grandfathers of AI, 2016 said radiologists are going to be out of jobs 2020. 6 years later, we still have a lot of radiologists. So I'm a little bit worried about that people are selling things without really understanding the full process. And I feel a little bit some of the investments are going in where I look at it and say, yeah, it's not going to happen. Like, one of the humanoid companies are promising they will have tens of thousands of robots doing daily chores in homes next year for $10,000 a year. Yeah, it's not going to happen. And so I'm a little bit worried about that we are overselling and under-delivering, and I feel we need to have a good alignment because, eventually the capital markets are going to say, wait a minute. We were sold this before, and we can't afford a 2009 sort of disaster where people it's crashing because we overpromised and underdelivered. So I feel we need to have a good alignment on where are the investments. And of course we're seeing, the baby boomers are now the ones who are putting a lot of money into the equity markets. How, they're going to be, you promised me
the time
a
horizon?
Robot, where is it? What's happening to me? So I think we need to be honest stewards of their money and make sure we can actually do it. And I feel it's very siloed today. There's very few places that really take sort of a global perspective on how can we change the world.
I mean, have you read the sort of Bank of International Settlements paper recently on shadow borrowing? It feels like some of these companies are betting the house, borrowing the neighbor's house, betting that as well. What would you say are the main headwinds that you would be sort of most mindful of at the moment, both robotics and also artificial intelligence? Is it regulatory? We saw what happened recently with Anthropic's models and, so not being offered internationally. Well, they've just closed access to them. Is it energy? And we saw OpenAI cancel its plans for UK data centers because of energy prices. Or is it safety and operational? Things like hallucinations and, if these technologies are deployed at vast scales, and at an enterprise level, and there's a massive fault, the reputational and trust damage that could do. What is the main sort of headwind risk in your mind?
So I think short-term energy is going to be a big sort of challenge, and then I think it's I think the headwind is probably we're over-investing in data centers right now. I actually think we are. Because I think we will get to scaled down models that will be much more computationally efficient. And then you're going to be left with all this real estate. And you're going to say, sort of like post-COVID real estate, where you can say, wait a minute, who's going to be in all of these data centers?
Overcapacity.
So huge overcapacity, and it's sort of short term. We're asking people to build more nuclear power plants. 10 years from now, we're going to be in a very different place, and people are going to say, who's going to use my big data center for this, or my big nuclear power plant? So I think we have to sort of look at time horizons, how quickly things, we can't just afford to say, today. We need the greedy algorithm we know is suboptimal. And we sort of need to have a way of thinking of a holistic perspective on what do I need in energy, what do I need in compute, what do I need in data. We're slowly getting to a point where we're seeing more and more data getting replaced by simulation, where we can do zero shots. I can literally train everything simulation, and I can deploy the robot, and it actually works. So if I don't need all this data, what are we going to do? So I feel people are using the greedy algorithm rather than having sort of a strategic roadmap for where should we go. And I think that's a global trend I'm sort of worried about, because we live in this sort of exponential development. So we just at last week, we had graduation at UC San Diego, and we sent out, 5,000 students coming out, and I would say some of them were trained to be programmers. We don't need them. So, because, the LLM models will allow us to do the drafting of the code and all of this. So we need to have a roadmap for what does society look like 5, 10 years from now. And for human capital, how do I make sure I educate them for the future, not for the shortages we have today, because that's not going to be the shortages tomorrow. So I feel there's a lack of a global vision of where should this go.
So we have a lack of global vision in the long term, a front-loading of greed to try and be part of the investment opportunity in the short term.
Yep. And I think it's very, I'm lacking sort of, at the same time, I think it's also, we're having this partitioning because US and China are competing rather than collaborating. The same thing, India is now coming in to have a play in this area. So there's a number of these. I went and saw a presentation by the European Commission 3 weeks ago on their vision for robotics and AI, and I was very disappointed. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This is not what you're doing. This is not what we need. So I'm lacking a global sort of collaboration on, it's not about is US or China winning, it's about how do we build a collaboration so we all win. We have to think about this. We have to think about, how do we save the climate? We're getting a super El Nino this year. There's a reason for it. And so I need people to really think about how do we address these global challenges. And then from this, how can nations contribute? So, we're sitting here, the Prime Minister is up for a renewal position, and we better have a vision for what does UK look like 5 or 10 years from now. How do you build this? UK used to be a very proud manufacturing country. What is the next fuel for society? And I see this in Denmark, and so I'm lacking we can't just, as we said, the greedy algorithm is not the way to go. We need this. And then we need sort of going back and understanding, if this is the global vision, what do I do tomorrow to invest in it?
Do you think we're currently in a place now where AI and robotics is not just an expression of greed, but an expression of the political landscape we're in? As you say, not one of international cooperation, but comes at a time of increased isolationism. It's a sad indictment, I guess. You point to the UK and the European approach. It doesn't seem like they even have a seat at the table in the current competition between two mega powers. You have the US and China. You've got the US limiting access to chips to China. And this doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon. Either the competition or what we are watching is the next space race here, because they both feel like this is the biggest power piece on the board, and they both want to gain the upper hand.
And I think there's an underlying hypothesis that if we take away technology, whether it's rare minerals from China or it's NVIDIA chips from the US, we're going to win. But if we've seen it, they took away some of the advanced chips, Qualcomm and others from China. Huawei developed this, and I would claim Huawei mobile chips are better than Western chips today. So Hisense, or sort of high silicon, has enabled to do this. So by taking it away from them, they said, okay, we're not going to just leverage their technology. We're going to have to develop our own. We did it better. Same thing happened with Huawei, where they were denied access to the Android operating system. They now have a new operating system for cell phones, Harmony. I would claim it's at least as good, if not better, than Android. So this, by building sort of a division between them, you're forcing them to innovate. You will not always win on such a strategy. So if they had continued to give them Android, Google would have had a seat at the table and understand what's going on in China. Now we don't have a seat at the table. The same thing, So I feel this of being adversarial will give you a short-term gain, but the long-term could be a challenge. We've seen this with robotic technology for China. China now is the biggest consumer of robots worldwide, and they've developed domestic. So last year was the first year where China produced more domestic robots than they imported from elsewhere. and this is only going to continue. And last year, China bought 55% of all robots sold worldwide. They are the top automotive provider in the world. The US is not even in top 10 anymore. So and a lot of Americans, oh, we're an automotive nation. No, you're not. So I think people have to sort of think about, how can I build a strategy where I also have long-term gains? This sort of short-term of trying to chop it up, I think it's extremely dangerous.
But it feels like neither side can afford to back down a little bit here. We call them sides, which is probably a dangerous wording. I mean, we're talking about things like Trump accounts now in the US to bolster investments in these large companies, the ones who are sort of underlying a lot of the spend that we've been discussing. It doesn't feel like in China, the state being behind or heavily involved in any kind of innovation is something we're used to. It feels like in the US, it's such an important political piece now that it won't just be left to private markets actually to dictate how this goes.
No, and I think that's extremely dangerous, because it's very stochastic or random. What is getting regulated, and I feel it makes us extremely volatile by constantly sort of changing what's going on and what is actually getting regulated. And then we are almost getting to a scenario in the US which is similar to China. And I think US used to be known for being sort of the free world and more sort of business drivers, and that's not happening.
Any words of wisdom to take away for our listeners and readers at home on a maybe as a sobering note as that, but anything for them to bear in mind as they try and navigate the next few years?
So I think the economic boom is going to continue, because we're seeing AI is going to be everywhere. So I think of AI as the new electricity. It's going to be everywhere. At the same time, I would sort of say, ignore AI, in the sense that everybody wants to learn AI right now. If I go back and look at how many kids learn about electricity in school, in terms of how is it generated, how is it's coming out of the outlets and stuff like that, they're not experts on electricity. They're experts on the utilities that we build using electricity. You should become the expert on the appliances and the utilities that we're building using AI, not being an expert on AI. So I feel there's too much emphasis on the hammer rather than what are we building with the tools. So I feel that, but we will continue to see massive growth on AI, and it's becoming sort of the new, sort of like computing in the 60s, like the electricity, 100 years ago. That's what we should think about. How does society change as AI becomes a commodity everywhere? And then as part of this, embodied AI will be robotics, where it's just everywhere. You have intelligent appliances, you have electronic intelligent wheelchairs, you have smart cars, you have everything will use this to do things for you in your daily life. So dirty, dull, dangerous things will go away.
Henrik, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing your thoughts. And thank you for tuning in. Have a lovely summer, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care.